It's rare you get to see a driver start in 17th out of 20 positions, mind you, and finish the race in first. This is Turn 1. We're your host, Thomas.
And Jeremiah.
We're going to be looking back at the chaotic São Paulo Grand Prix. I feel like this is one of those every year where it's 50-50, whether it's going to be pure chaos. We got that this year. I'm going to start by posing a question to the comment section. Have you ever seen more drivers go off track under non-racing laps than the 2024 São Paulo Grand Prix? We had Lance Stroll in the formation lap. We had the Haas's. We had, Bearman, Hulkenberg. We had Joe go off track. We had Colapinto go off track. Everybody went off track under safety car and red flag.
And that's just whenever the race was underway and we had formation laps and red flags and safety cars. That's not even to mention qualifying, where pretty much anybody that could crashed, and they had to fix half the cars on the grid, it felt like. I mean, you got to give it to the Williams mechanics, man. They give it everything they can, but man, their work is really against them.
It was a very wet day in São Paulo. The rain was almost nonstop from the formation lap to about lap 43, 45-ish, and then it kind of dried up. Yeah, it was. There were times when the drivers were saying it was unraceable. Let's start there, which is not normally where we start on recapping a race, the formation lap, because usually they're uneventful. But today we got to see something. And I think I actually asked you when we were in Austin for the United States Grand Prix, I think I looked at you and I said, like, what happens if someone goes off during the reconnaissance laps, right? Or what if somebody goes off in the formation lap? Do they just not race? Because I don't think we had seen that before. Maybe we had and I just didn't notice it. But we saw it in São Paulo where Lance Stroll just locks up and goes off.
Yeah, that's rough. I mean, we've never been the biggest Lance Stroll fans. I guess I should start there. So, I mean, it's not like we were insanely surprised when we saw that it was him. I don't think anybody thought it was Fernando Alonso at first glance. That's tough. That's really tough.
Well, and explain how he tried to get out of this situation.
I don't remember, to be fair, if this was qualifying or if this was the formation lap. I think it was qualifying. But there was an instance where Lance Stroll slapped the wall, and it's like, okay, he's cool. He's on concrete. He's got the car moving. He puts it in reverse, backs up a little bit, puts it back in drive, tries to go through the gravel pit and beaches it. So now what was essentially just a yellow flag for a little bit while he backs up and gets back on track is now a full-fledged red flag as they got to go out and recover him.
Yeah, no, that was, unless he did it again in qualifying, I don't remember. That was the race where he just drove straight in the gravel and came on the radio and said, "I am beached." Like, come on, dude. Okay, so outside of that, I mean, anytime you have the rain, anytime you're starting on the inters or the wets, which everybody I think started on the inters for this race, you have the chaos. Of course, they had to do a restart because of the whole Lance Stroll situation. They line up again. They don't have Lance out there. They also don't have Albon out there because his car is destroyed, as Jeremiah mentioned, from qualifying. And Max is down in 17th, and you're thinking that there's no chance he's working his way up through this because there's no overtakes in the rain, really, right? Unless just stuff happens. But man, did he find a way to every single lap pick somebody off at turn one. Is there anybody that takes the Senna S curves better than Max Verstappen?
Not only that, that especially though, because he was really dominant in that particular section of the track. But it goes back to the stories that we would hear of Jos Verstappen training Max back when he was in his go-karting days, where you would hear the stories of, every single kid, when the rain would start coming in hard and it was cold and rainy, all the kids would go back in the garage and they'd be sitting there getting their hot chocolate or whatever, and there'd be one driver going around the track still, and that was young Max, and Jos telling him to keep going, and if his hands got numb because it was so cold, to put them on the muffler for a little bit, let them warm up, but don't leave them there too long or they'll get burned. And then just keep going lap after lap in the rain, in the cold. So now finally you get to the pinnacle of motorsport under the biggest lights in Brazil, Formula One, and it is a torrential downpour. The track has wet spots everywhere. The whole track is basically a lake, and you have one driver, just one driver, sitting here just picking apart one at a time, all the way up to the top, all the way as high as he can possibly go. from 17th to 1st.
Do you know where he was the second time he went through the S curves, which are the first set of turns after you start a lap? Do you
Right.
know where he was on his second lap after going through the Senna S curves? What position he was in?
He
I do.
was he was already 10th, wasn't he?
He was 10th. He was in 11th and he passed Lewis at turn 1 and got into 10th.
That's unreal. 7 off the bat in one lap.
In one lap, he's in the points. And then it was just a matter of literally every lap picking somebody off at turn 1 over the next 68 laps.
The best part has to be, in no way did he expect to win this race. He even said that. He said he thought that they could do good this race and coming back, but he had no expectation of winning this race. So when you have a Max Verstappen that has no expectations of winning the race, you have this calm demeanor, who's patient, who lets the race come to him instead of frantically fighting for the front spot. And when that Max is driving, it's almost like the race does come to him. It leans completely his way. Everything that could go right goes right. And it's just a Max spree all over the place.
Before we get to the day the Alpines had, which is not something I thought we would say at all this season, to be honest with you. And I got a funny quote from their team engineer, which I'll try to remember here in a little bit. Let's talk about some of the young drivers. I thought early on the young drivers were showing off in front of the veteran drivers. You had Colapinto passing Hamilton. You had Bearman passing Hamilton and Perez. Lawson was trying to dogfight Max and hold him off, although he couldn't do it for more than about a half a lap before he finally gave in and let Max around. What were your overall thoughts on like the newcomers to F1?
I think it boils down to experience. The older drivers, more, and I say older, but even guys with like 3-4 years of experience, they know that whenever it's rainy like this, yes, there's more room for opportunity, but still, just like a regular race, you can't force it. You have to find the right opportunities to make the move and take them then. If you're coming up on a guy and it looks like you're going to have to dive bomb a corner, hey man, it's raining. Do it on the next lap. Just stay behind him.
Yeah, and I think we saw Bearman run off a time or two, saw that happen, and then ultimately, man, Colapinto had pretty much a home field advantage. He's from Argentina. They were down in Brazil, so that's about as close as you're going to get. There was a ton of people in the crowd with Colapinto flags and signs and all that.
Yeah.
And he just slaps a wall was it a safety car or a virtual safety car? One of the two slaps a wall and blows his front left tire off.
Yeah, and you mentioned this before we started filming, and I think everybody saw this, but when the camera pans to the garage, and more specifically to the Williams engineer, and he's sitting there like, I mean, you gotta feel for these guys. I mean, it's like almost every single race that they're sitting here looking at the work of the rebuild that they now have to do, either in qualifying before the race or after the race before the next race or whatever it is. They're just constantly fixing these cars.
Well, and I mean, with Williams, so they had Albon out in quali, and so they probably spent all night trying to fix his car. I don't know if they called it early and said maybe it's not repairable.
Quali was the morning before the race because it got canceled the night before.
Oh, good call. So they spent hours trying to fix this car, probably stressed out of their minds. And this kid that's not even going to be on their team next year. Colapinto's been a fine driver in the races that he's been in, but he doesn't have a race seat for next year. That's going to be filled by Carlos Sainz. He goes and blows up his whole left side of the car.
It was bad too. I think they were saying that he hit like the one part of the track that it wasn't the smart tech barriers or whatever it was concrete. So it just destroyed. I mean, there was coolant leaking all over the concrete.
They had to come out and pour this like the powder on the where it leaked.
And take the broom and just start brushing it up. I mean, it was so bad. The wheel was just hanging. One of the if you're looking at the back wing, one of the struts was just completely gone. The side pod was just destroyed and mangled. Oh my gosh.
And with like coolant leaking, whether it was a radiator or something else, sometimes when you hit the F1 cars, okay, it's a wheel assembly, that's fine. Okay, maybe it's a side pod, that's fine. You're getting into some internal stuff there.
Yeah.
And now you might be replacing parts that make the car go, not the parts that just make the car look good.
On top of that, if you're really unlucky, you could be looking at having to take a penalty to replace an engine part.
Yeah. Especially when we're coming into the last 3 races, you might have already burned through a lot of your parts.
Right.
There's no telling what you got. Carlos Sainz, another casualty of the race. So we had 5 in total. We had Albon not start the race, Stroll on the formation lap, Nico Hulkenberg and Colapinto on lap 30, and then Sainz on lap 38.
Nico's was weird because he ended up on the old part of the track that was insanely banked that they don't even use anymore. And he was on a weird part where like the tracks aren't like fully flush, but like there's a little divot in between them.
Right.
And he put the middle part of his car right on that. And because of that, I think the back tires weren't touching the ground fully. He wasn't able
high centered because when they went to the camera shot, his at least his front wheel and I think his back left wheel were like off the ground.
Right. So what happened is the marshals came out and they gave him just a light tap, just the ever so lightest tap, enough to get him to where his tire's back on the ground. He backs up, gets back onto the track, gets back into the race. Then he's shown the black flag. Well, hey man, you can't do that because you had to have assistance in getting back on the track. Therefore, you're disqualified.
You got to pull the old Nigel Mansell and get out and push it.
I wonder if drivers are allowed to do that still.
There's no way you can get out on track.
I mean, you see the drivers whenever they're getting out of the car after the race, they got to unhook this, undo that, take off the wheel. They got to unhook the Hans device. They got to pull out the...
I feel like if you get out of your vehicle, that's got to be an automatic DQ just for safety purposes. Okay, let's dive into Alpine unless there's anything else you want to look at.
No.
I don't have a lot on their race other than flawless execution of the range strategy. Maybe not even flawless execution is the right word, but maybe for them, pure luck is the way to go when you look at how the red flag worked out for them not pitting. So the 2 Alpine drivers and Max were the only drivers to have not taken a stop before that red flag. And they were first, second, and third. And so when they come back out for the restart, they have new tires and are first, second, and third.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when you go back and you look at the history of Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, which is not super illustrious, you know, they both have, I think, 1 win, couple podiums to their names. Their wins, Pierre's at Italy, I want to say Monza, and then Esteban Ocon at Hungary back in 21, both chaotic races with many driver retirements. It kind of seems like those 2 drivers just have a way of navigating the chaos and not falling into it.
Yeah, I would say that's right, just because of the fact that the whole Pierre Gasly winning at AlphaTauri, which wouldn't happen without the chaos, and Esteban Ocon winning at Alpine, that wouldn't have happened without the chaos. But also, you got to look at where they started, and I was trying to pull this up before I started talking here because now I'm kind of just second guessing myself. If I'm not mistaken, Esteban Ocon started in the top 10. I believe that's correct. But
he was 4th.
Yes, but Pierre Gasly, I want to say he started 13th. And I'm trying to find that.
He was, yeah. He was.
So that's extreme in its own right. Because one, Lance stayed on those tires longer than, and you can make the argument, well, he would have had to pit anyway if it wasn't for the red flag. That doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is he took the risk to stay on those tires and it paid off. That's strategy. To stay on those tires in those torrential conditions is insane, and you have to have all the confidence in the world. And the skill. You have to have skill if your tires, if those inners are starting to go and you're sitting here on what are now essentially slicks, still on a slick surface, trying to make it around the entire track without losing the back end like we saw all of the other drivers do on the day. You got to give all the props in the world to Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon for holding on to this 4th place position through all of that and then staying out.
I don't even know if Esteban gets a ton of credit for me. I know he started in 4th, finished in 2nd. Doesn't look that good on paper. Before the red flag, when he was running in 1st place, he had like a 7 or 8 second lead on Max. That's how much better he was on his intermediate tires than the rest of the field. He had pushed out a solid lead.
I can't remember. I watched not the post-race interview press conference, but the post-race interview where they first get out of the car, get their stuff off, and then they're interviewed. And Max was giving all the credit in the world to Esteban because when the leaders pit, Russell and Lando. Then it was Esteban and Max behind them. He said that Esteban was flying around this track. And for, a 3-time world, ultimately about to be a 4th-time world champion, we'll get into that later. For that much credentials to be telling somebody that they're flying, you have to believe it.
Yeah. Only other thing for me is when Ocon came on the radio at the end, I took down the quote. He said to his engineer, "You didn't think we'd be here, huh, guys?" And his engineer goes, "Funny enough, no, I did not think we would be."
Nobody did. The
Oh.
last thing anybody expected is a side-by-side shot of Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon as they're doing the in-lap to finish the race. As they're cheering, their hands are going out of the cockpit. Just, oh my gosh.
Like,
And then
the teams aren't unintelligent. They know where they're supposed to finish races. They know if their guy starts in 4th, he is not supposed to finish anywhere near the top 4.
Yeah, and Pierre Gasly was on the radio talking about how it was a historic day or legendary day. I think he said historic. And it's hard to argue with that, considering we're talking about a team that's 9th in the standings right now, and the only team worse is Stake, who has 0 points. And now with this huge win, they're going to get, 40 points, 43, something like that. And that's going to catapult them up to 6th in the Constructors.
Okay, let us know in the comments. Like I asked at the top, have you ever seen a race where more drivers have gone off track, not racing? And also, I'll add, tune into a midweek episode this week where we detail the. Go ahead.
I do have one more thing to add, and it's something that Lando said after the race.
Yeah, before I plug, go away.
You should hear this. So Lando Norris gets interviewed talking about the Max Verstappen win, and he was not happy about it whatsoever. His quote was, and this is specifically talking about being able to change your tires under red flag, and that being a rule in Formula One. His quote was, "I don't care about the hindsight of things. That's luck for them. Nothing more. They got lucky. And a rule that no one agrees with. Probably today they will agree with it, but every driver has disagreed with it in the past." Hey, man, he went from 17th to 1st. That's not luck. That's skill.
17th to the 1st, flawless tire strategy execution, and Max didn't go off track. Lando, you went off track on lap 43 when they restarted the race. You lost like 3 positions.
No, the amount of skill that Max showed in this race was unmatched by any other driver, hands down.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely crazy. We're going to dive into that battle middle of this week when we look at how the Drivers' Championship is more or less over. Mathematically, not so much, but we're going to recap the battles of the year and talk you through that. Jeremiah?
Guys, realistically, if you think that Lance Stroll was able to start that race, don't you think he would have finished in the top 3? I mean, I think you're over-exaggerating, but maybe.
All right, we'll see you.
Bye, guys.